it's Chantal with Wildberry Quilting. This is the 3D dimple dot, and this stuff is amazing. It just absorbs like 10 times its weight within a matter of seconds. And we are going to be using it to make burp cloths. Let's get started. All right, so for our burp cloth, I have cut 2 pieces of our Zorb fabric, and they are approximately 16 by 7 inches. And I just have a couple of extra pieces of fabric that I'm going to use as my pretty fabric on the other side. And this is just quilting cotton. Now, we are going to just grab a plate. It doesn't really matter. And if your plate does not completely cover the end like this, that's okay. It doesn't have to. We're mainly just using it to create a nice rounded edge here. And I'm just going to do the same thing on all 4 corners. You know, don't stress too much about it. It's going to look fairly even when you get done, as long as you get it in the general ballpark. Now that we have this marked out, we're just going to cut off these edges. And you could use a pair of scissors for this. That might actually be a better option for rounding the edges. I'm just going to trim the rest of our fabric. Then I will use my scissors to trim the edges, since it gives you just a little bit more control over rounding them. Don't worry about if it looks a little bit jagged. When you are going around this and sewing it on the sewing machine, we can cleanly round those corners with our stitching. So our first step after we have cut everything is we will take our pieces and we are going to lay right sides together. And you can pin around this so that you can keep everything lined up, or you could use quilting clips or whatever your preference is. We are going to sew from here all the way around and just leave about a 2 to 3 inch gap. Let's go stitch. All right, I've got everything pinned together now, and I've put double clips at the end of where I'm going to stop stitching and at the beginning, so I know where to start. And I'm just going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you want to reinforce your stitches at the beginning and end, since we are going to be turning this. It'll just make it a little bit easier for you and less likely that your stitches will come out. And as we go along this corner, we're just going to ever so slightly turn our fabric. And don't worry about what that seam allowance is doing. We had a little bit of jagged edges, so it may not be completely flush with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. But as long as we come back along to our 1/2 inch, by the time we hit our straightaway, we will be fine. And again, I am approaching another corner here, so I'm just going to gently turn it. And if you feel like you might run off the edge too quickly, you can always put your needle into the down position and turn it ever so slightly to get a little bit more of a turn as you go around that curve. And then we just want to come back along with that 1/2 inch seam allowance when we get to our straightaway. Make sure as you go, your fabric is not bunching up on you. And we're just going to stitch all the way down until we get to the other side. fabric grew a little bit on me here, but again, that's not that big of a deal. We're just going to gently turn around this corner, making sure that we are catching this quilting cotton that's on the bottom. Now, something else that you can do if you don't want to use the quilting cotton is you could actually use a layer of PUL on the back of this instead, and that would help create a water resistant barrier so that there's even less of a chance that anything would ever get through this burp cloth when you're using it. Although this dimple dot fabric will do an awful lot to help protect you with keeping things from getting on your clothing. It's very absorbent. So we have this all sewn together. Now we are going to trim around it. Specifically, we want to trim around these corners so that it can lay nice and flat. I happen to have a pair of pinking shears, which are very useful for this type of a project where you want to go around curves. But if you don't have a pair of pinking shears, don't worry. I will show you how you can use regular scissors for that instead. So we're just going to trim around these edges, and we want to get it to, on these rounded parts, 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. And you can snip in just a little bit more, being mindful not to move past these stitches. We do not want to cut into these stitches at all, just up closer to it. So if you can see, I'm still several threads away. I'm not in any danger of breaking through. And you just want to do this all the way around on all of your rounded edges. And you can certainly trim up the other parts of it as well, but you don't have to get very close. Now, I will say on this edge where we have not attached, we have not sewn right here, we do not want to trim this at all. We will leave this intact. So if you want to trim up the rest of it, come in at an angle once you're past that area and trim, and you can trim up to that area and then cut away at an angle, leaving it still there and intact, because the more of the fabric you have remaining here, the easier this will be able to turn. All right, so I have everything trimmed up now, and I've clipped in on my corners. So now we are going to turn our burp cloth. And if you've left a nice 3 to 4 inch opening there, I think I said 2 to 3 before, but it really doesn't matter as long as you have enough space. You can just turn this right out. Since we're doing rounded edges, you really don't need anything sharp to poke it out. You can just run your finger, the back of your fingernail along it, and you'll get it nice and rounded. And that will help protect it so that it does not, you're not poking through your fabric or creating too harsh of a point, because we're rounded, we're not going for points. All right, so it's starting to look more like a burp cloth now. We're just going to turn this edge in, and as you can see, my quilting cotton is already wanting to turn in. And I'm just going to take a couple of clips and clip that. And I'm going to clip it at either end first. That way I can maneuver this fabric without it stretching quite as much. And you may see that it wants to grow a little bit, but it's not that bad. And if you are gentle with it, it maneuvers right into place. All right. So now we are almost done. I am going to sew this on the quilting cotton side. And I'm going to go with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Since we used a 1/2 inch, this will be no problem. It will cut, we have a 1/2 of an inch folded in. So a 1/4 inch around the edge will catch that. And we're just going to sew all the way around. Now sewing from the quilting cotton side being on the top will help any of the fabric growth that you had on the other side fall into place more evenly, and you shouldn't see any kind of bubbling or anything. And again, we're just going to turn our corner as we get to it. This time we are caring about where our stitches land on this. We are trying to stay with the corner that we created when we were sewing it together on the inside. And we are being careful not to pull on the fabric as we sew it. I'm just maneuvering it into place. Pull on it, you're a lot more likely to end up with wobbly sides. Which you can see there's a little, this is laying fairly flat. There's a little bit of a wobble here, but that could iron right out, no problem. And once it goes through the washing machine and the dryer, it'll all disappear. I will tell you that before I started sewing with this fabric, I did wash it. Not the quilting cotton, but I washed the dimple dot because it does have a little bit of shrinkage and it does arrive fairly crisp compared to how soft it ends up after you wash it. It's a little bit thicker fabric, so you really don't need it to be crisp. And it'll help keep it to, it'll help it to not shrink unevenly if you wash it beforehand. All right, I've met my stitches again. I'm just going to overlap them by about 1 inch and then back stitch a couple of stitches, cut my thread. All right, let's go take a look at it. All right, guys, so this is our finished burp cloth and it just came out so cute. And I know my cousin is going to love using this with her new baby. This should help protect her clothing and help clean up all of those little spills. All right, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.